I hope I'm there.
Yeah.
There you are. Brilliant. Do you want to, you've got 7 minutes. I'll tell you when you've got a minute to go, Joe. And if you want to start by introducing yourself, that would be brilliant.
Fantastic. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jo Wall. I'm the Strategic Director for Climate Response at an organisation called Local Partnerships. We are a public sector organisation and we're owned by the Treasury, the Local Government Association and the Welsh Government. So I spend quite a lot of my time working with local authorities who are working on climate emergency. And one of the things that I've done this year is co-author the Local Government Association guidance on green finance called Financing Green Ambition, which I think is why I'm here to talk to you this evening. I'm not going to do death by PowerPoint, but I am going to show you a few slides just to kind of break things up. So hopefully, just a minute, if you give me 2 ticks, I'll remember how to share a screen. It's been a while. Right, so hopefully you can now see my screen.
Yep, we can.
Excellent. I was going to say, if someone will confirm that, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, I'm just talking to a black. It's happened before, don't worry. So that's us, that's Local Partnerships. In terms of, I'm here to talk tonight about the magic money tree. And I know that we're all a bit concerned about how we're going to finance the massive number of things that need to be done. Just to set some context around that, though, before we actually get into that, there's a couple of things that are worth thinking about before we get into the debate. So the first bit here, this is a graph, and I was told by Pete not to show you any graphs, so I apologise. But this is illustrating a point, which is that if you start to do things at scale and pace, and you start to deliver lots and lots of the same thing, then the price starts to fall, and it starts to fall really quite dramatically. So this is the cost of solar and solar panels. So back in 1975, they were horribly expensive. I've been involved in UK solar since 2010. In 2010, a kilowatt of solar would have cost you nearly £2,500 to install. It now costs about £400 to install. And that's because the cost of the technology has fallen exponentially. So the first thing to remember in this is that some of the things we're looking at that are really expensive today, as we globally start to deliver them at scale and pace, will actually reduce in cost in real terms. So some of the numbers, actually things that don't look like they stack up now, some of them will actually stack up as good things to do in terms of cost savings going forward. Not all of them, but some of them. Secondly, I want to talk to you about truth and justice and actually getting our numbers right. So what I've got on this slide is an extract from what you might be recognised as part of your electricity bill. Everybody gets this. And the little segment in red entitled environmental and other social costs is what paid for the original feed-in tariffs and ROC tariffs for renewable energy. And they highlight to everyone the cost of that. What this doesn't do is tell the other side of the story. And the other side of the story is that you can't see the price of nuclear on here. You can't see the fact that renewable energy now is the cheapest form of energy we've got in the UK because of that initial investment. You can't see the decommissioning costs on the nuclear. You can't see the costs of coal. You can't see the tax subsidies and breaks that are given to big organisations to go and explore for more oil and gas either. So there's an awful lot of costs that you don't see, and all you see is the little bit that says, oh, renewables are expensive, and actually that's old news. So really understanding some of that's actually quite helpful in terms of thinking about where there might be other pockets of money that we as a society might use in terms of actually dealing with some of the climate things. So before we begin, just a very simple, what we need to do. We need to use less, and what we do use, we need to plug in. And what we plug it into, whether it's hydrogen or whether it's electricity, needs to be generated from renewable sources. That's what will get us to net zero. So stop burning fossil fuels, start using renewable electricity. Fairly simple, really. In terms of shaking that magic money tree, there are some places that we can go. So the first bit is around taxation and the national picture. So in this circle here, there are 2 ways that national government raise funds from the general public to pay for all sorts of things that in this context are likely to come through in terms of infrastructure funding that local government might receive for things, but also grants for things like the Green Homes Grant, for cycle lanes, for all sorts of other things, electric vehicle charge points. We're starting to see quite a lot of grant money in the green space. And the money for that is raised through a combination of national taxation, and that's tax on you as an individual, but it's also tax on companies. And as I said, some of those tax breaks that the big companies get at the moment subsidise fossil fuels rather than renewables. And the other way that the government raise money is by what's called a bond. And bonds are investments that private individuals and corporations on the stock market make in, you might have heard of gilts and things like that. And they're basically long-term investments that pay a very low interest rate because the government is a very secure risk. And they have said that they're going to raise a green sovereign bond specifically to pay for green works. So we're expecting to see that fundraising coming out this year, and that money will then get distributed out through things like grants and infrastructure funding. The purpose of grants is twofold. One is it is to drive forward the market where the market hasn't yet reached a point of maturity where it will drive itself in a lot of places. And the other is for areas that either don't have any form of financial payback. So things like a lot of the adaptation, the work that's going to happen to prepare us for flooding and things like that, doesn't actually have an easy business case to make. But also where you want to stimulate the economy. So what we're seeing at the moment is quite a lot of stimulus going into green jobs. And we're seeing that through the Green Homes Grant. We're seeing that through things like the infrastructure money, the 1.3 billion that's being made available for electric vehicle charging. The second place. Okay, I'm doing best. The second place you can go for money is actually us as a society. And that comes in lots of different forms, but these tend to be things that need to have some form of invest to save kind of criteria around them. So those include individuals investing in their own houses, their own vehicles, they include pension funds investing things, and they include community bonds, which is where you do kind of crowdfunding to raise money to do projects. So buy a solar farm or a wind turbine or put charging points in. And those tend to be on an invest to save basis in a slightly mature market. And then the final place that you could go is around raising additional local taxes. And some local authorities have talked about raising a specific climate change levy to deal with some of the things they want and need to do locally. So far, nobody's done it. That's partly because of COVID. I believe Warwick was one of the places that got very close to doing it. But that is another source of funding, as are other fundraising means that the local authority have, such as Section 106 contributions from developers. If you have the right policy, you can make the developers of new houses contribute to some of the infrastructure that is required to support those new developments. I'm going to leave that there because otherwise I'm going to cut off in my prime.
So that was Joe on finance. Now we're going to move on to a different commentator, Paul Chatterton, and he's going to talk to us about this idea of a more integrated way of working. So Paul, are you ready? Are you okay to introduce yourself and then take up to 7 minutes? Okay.
Hi everyone, great to be here. Good to meet you all. So I'm Paul Chatterton. I work at the University of Leeds. I'm a professor of geography there, professor of urban futures. So I do loads of stuff on sustainable cities, do a lot of advising local authority decision makers, that kind of thing. So it's great to be with you tonight. You want to know about integrated solutions? Well, that's really exciting because I think I spend a lot of time thinking and advising people in terms of like, how do we create more integrated approaches to creating more sustainable places? Yeah, and there's a couple of what we're dealing with here is what we call we want win-win outcomes. Yeah, we want the benefits that we achieve to have benefits in other areas. Policymakers call these co-benefits, and that's one of the key ideas that you really want to push and ask the other kind of speakers about, especially policymakers. When we make improvements in one area, how can we ensure they have co-benefits in other areas, right? There are multiple benefits all over the place. And you can think about economic, you can think about environmental, you can think about social. But the way I think about it is a little diagram I've got here. I'm just going to share my screen. Is this one? Not that one, this one. You can see that these three circles, basically, what we're dealing with, especially in these changing times, is I mean, imagine you've got multiple crises, right? You've got multiple things we're trying to deal with. What we're trying to do is we're trying to respond to what you've heard about this kind of climate emergency where we've got a whole global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, every locality is trying to do the same. So we've got to make our places climate safe. We've got to somehow, as we come out of COVID, be more fleet of foot, be ready for future pandemics, yeah, and recover better from COVID. So we've got to do that as well. And we've got to build better places that are more resilient. So communities that are more resilient. And that just means better places to live where you as individuals will thrive in that place. Yeah. So what does this mean? Well, one of the ways I think about it is like, here's 4 things we could do which are quite integrated in our communities, where these like multiple benefits will happen, right? So we've got to start using our cars less, and you've heard about that. We've got to really green our places because we know that wildlife is decreasing. We've got to make our places safer, and that's in terms of road transport, that's in terms of cost of housing, that's in terms of like quality green space, and the social useful economy. We've got to have decent local jobs. So all those 4 things together, imagine the things that we do, if they can have an effect on all those things at the same time, every pound we spend will be a better pound spent. Now, I'm going to show you an example of a kind of a table you can create. What I do is I do this exercise with policymakers and I say, look, if you want to take, I don't know, how do you reduce cars? You remember those 3 circles that we talked about? Community, COVID, and climate. We want to hit those buttons, right? We want to don't go back into a pandemic. We want to build safer communities, and we want to reduce climate change. So you can think all the kinds of things we do. How do they affect them positively, in a medium way, or not much? And you can start to think about that and see which has really strong effects over all those different indicators. So that's just one way about thinking about integrated solutions, right? And the last point I'm going to mention, because I appreciate I've only got 7 minutes, is to get here. It's all well and good saying, yeah, we want integrated solutions. Yeah, if we build better green spaces, we want to create community cooperatives so there's local jobs or there's less pollution from cars. It's all well and good saying that. One of the key things that you want to interrogate people on as you're doing this is, how will that happen? Yeah, and so we need integrated decision making. Now, there's a number of different ways we can do this in Leeds, and this has been spread out in many other different places in the UK. So you could talk to your local policymakers about this, where they've set up a climate commission model, where you get different stakeholders together. So you get typically 4 different sectors, and these are the 4 sectors you need to get together: local authorities, local businesses, the universities, because they've got loads of money in research, and what we call civic society, churches, voluntary groups, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you've got to get those 4 groups together because they tend to work on their own in silos. They've got their own working practices and their own funding streams. Getting those 4 to work together will allow us to, in one place, create an integrated approach to identifying problems and coming up with solutions. Because otherwise what will happen is that each of these different sectors will generate their own solutions and think about the problems in their own way. Yeah, and that's why things get stuck locally. And you get them unstuck by creating one of these local coalitions, which is actually better if it's led by the local authority. So the last point I'm going to make is that what you need to push your local authority decision makers on, these councillors and members, is to make sure they've got their act sorted internally, and they need to set up a really clear climate emergency committee, right, internally, which has got a really good citizens participation and has long-lasting links with an assembly or a jury like this, that they can feed information into citizens and back. So that's for information in and out, so that you can scrutinize what they're doing and set milestones to monitor their progress. Much more to be said on it, and I'd love to explore some of this more in the questions with you, but there's lots of things that need to get arranged much better in a local area to make this integrated solutions happen on the ground. Okay, thanks, Peter.